Hi everybody, this is Coach International Master Roderick Nava, and today we're going to analyze the game between Super Grandmaster Wojtaszek of Poland versus Super Grandmaster Anton David Guijarro of Spain in the ongoing Tata Steel Chess 2021 in Wijk Aan Zee, Netherlands. It was started yesterday, January 16, and it will end up on January 31, 2021. The time control is standard long game, and the format is 14 players round robin. Alright, for more details in this tournament, just look on the posted link in the description below. Without further ado, let's get started. Wojtaszek played d4, Guijarro played knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5, approaching queen's gambit, and then white played g3, approaching Catalan formation, where black played bishop b4 check, bishop d2, provoking the dark sword bishop to play there, then go back to e7. So that's one of the theoretical pattern in this opening. And the bishop d2 will become a hindrance along the d-file control in the near middle game structure. Then white played bishop g2, knight bd7 develop, queen c2, c6 to solidify the d5 pawn, and then white went castle. b6. What's the idea of b6? In order to develop the light squared bishop to b7 or on the a6 square, so to put pressure on the c4. And here, white played rook d1 here, prepares the battle along the d-file. So if there will be a future breakthrough along the d-file, then the rook on d1 is ready. And then now, bishop a6 develop with tempo. Then white simply played b3 to support the c4. So here, if white captures the d5, then black could simply captures with c-pawn. And sooner or later, the rook will go there to c8, and black will gonna do first to control the c-file, and that is very important. Alright, so that's why white played simply with b3, then black castles. a4, what's the intention of a4? In order to play a5. Alright, to put pressure, to give pressure towards the black's queen side. And here, black played h6 to protect the g5 square, and also at some point releases the background weakness, and white continues with a5, all right? And queen c8, what's the idea of queen c8? So beside an extra protection on the bishop on a6, and also prepares the battle along the c file. And then here white simply played and developed with knight a3, then c5. All right, so that's the idea, or that's the point of queen c8. And queen b2 releases the c-file, maybe either rook on a to play on c1 or rook d to c1, just to control the important c-file. And then here, black went b takes a5. All right, so this move was a novelty because it was happened before where black went rook d8 in a game of Bescos Anzano, Manuel Jesus versus Sokolov Victor last 2009, and the game went draw. All right, so I will post that link in the description below. Okay, so here, let's go back with b takes a5, then bishop takes a5, rook b8 to put pressure on the b3 pawn, then queen a2 to move away from the b file, and d takes c4, knight takes c4, bishop b7, and rook d c1. All right, so due to queen on c8, so that's why rook d c1 puts a great pressure along the c file. And here, white played bishop d5, bishop d2, simply to threaten the a7 pawn at some point. And here, knight e4. So Guijarro doesn't care about that a pawn, and he looks on some good counter chances. And here, white played bishop f4, attacks the rook on b8, rook b7. So to move away from the threat and also to defend the a7 pawn. Then knight fd2, neutralizing the knight on e4. Then black took the knight. Bishop takes d5 first, e takes d5, then knight takes d2. So here, based on the computer evaluation, it gives slightly better for white because black has more problem than white here. The d5 and the a7 and also the queen on c8 is vulnerable to attack. So here, he moves away from c-file with queen d8, queen a6, threatening the rook on b7, and black played queen b6, defending the rook on b7 as well as neutralizing the queen on a6. Then white played bishop e3 here. Interesting move. All right, then rook fb8. So we have a question here. What will happen if black will take the d4 pawn? Then white could simply take that pawn on d4. with bishop takes d4, and it's not possible to take that bishop because of queen takes b7. Yeah, white has the hanging knight on d2, but just the same with the black with knight on d7. So things will go exactly with queen takes d2 and queen takes d7, and white simply wins in exchange. So it's not good for black. That's why went rook f b8 here, then queen d3, go back to maintain the tension, then c takes d4, bishop takes d4, bishop c5, bishop takes c5, knight takes c5, then queen takes d5. Even though white snatched an extra pawn here, but then look on the b3 pawn, so it could also fall sooner or later. Then black took the pawn on b3, knight takes b3, queen takes b3, queen takes b3, rook takes b3, then rook takes a7. So as you can see, white has 4 pawns and black has 3 pawns. But then the pawn stays at the same side of the board. So it doesn't really matter even though white has an extra pawn here. So white played rook b1, tries to exchange the rook, rook takes b1, rook takes b1 check, king g2, then h5, controls the g4 square. And that is very important to avoid the whites playing g4. And at some point, white can do some maneuvering and controls along those squares. But yeah, just the same, it's equal. King f3, g6, h4, king g7, e4, rook b3 check, king f4, rook b2, threatening the pawn on f2. Just simply played f3, rook b4 to prevent any progress for white. Then rook a5, king f6, g4, h takes g4, king takes g4, rook b1. So it's very hard to make some progress for white at this point. h5, rook g1 check, king f4, g takes h5, rook takes h5, then rook a1, rook h6 check, king g7, rook d6, rook a3, e5, rook a4 check, king f5, rook a3, attacking the f pawn again, f4, rook a5. All right, so at this point, it's quite really hard for white to make some progress here. Then rook b5, rook d7, rook a5. As long as the rook stays along the 5th rank, so white couldn't try to play e6 here because of the pin. So king g4, king f8, king f5, king g7, king e4, king f8, f5, king e8, attacking the rook, rook c7, rook a1, king f4, rook g1. All right, so what's the idea of rook g1? This is a very important move to limit the white king to play on the g file. So to avoid king g5, to maneuvers to f6, because if the white king reaches the f6 square, that's another story. All right, so rook g1 plays an important role, and then here white played rook b7, f6, amazing move. So here, white played rook b8 check. But then, before we go through the real game happened, so let's examine the f6 move. What will happen if white will take that pawn on f6? Then black could play a lot of checks here. King e5, rook e1 check, king d5, rook d1 check, king e6, rook e1 check. So there's no enough shelter for the white king to cover up his king. So that's the problem. So it's a draw. So many checks coming. So, and then if white will play e6, then just the same scenario with the rook f1 check. Let's say king g4, rook g1 check, hoping to play with king h5 and king g6, but then it's not possible because if king h5, then rook g5 check, grabbing the pawn on f5 immediately. All right, so just the same with draw. So that's why white played rook b8 check here, king e7, rook b7 check, king e8, e6, rook f1 check, king e4, rook e1 check, king d5, rook d1 check, king c4, rook c1 check, king d3, rook d1 check, king c4, rook c1 check. And based on the chess notation, the result is draw. Okay, so maybe Wojtaszek accept the fact that there's no progress anymore for white side. All right, so both players are really great. They showed their expertise in this kind of endgame. And I hope you learned from this game. So thank you very much for your patience, and please bear with my English. I can only use simple English words and simple English structures. But then I do believe in the near future, due to consistent practice, I can do a lot of improvements when it comes to English video like this. Apologize for the shortcomings. But I do believe as long as you have some understanding in chess, you can drive on what am I talking about in this analysis. Thank you very much once again. This is Coach International Master Roderick Nava. If you have some suggestions and comments, just leave a message in the comment box below. Once again, this is your Coach International Master Roderick Nava. See you next time, God willing.